Hey, what if I told you that the idea of right and wrong might be the most powerful evidence for the existence of God? You might be thinking, wait, what? How is that possible? But stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to see morality in a completely different light. You'll discover why our sense of justice, fairness, and even guilt might point to something much bigger than ourselves. In fact, I'm going to show you why morality, yes, morality is one of the strongest clues that God exists. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, let's think about it. We all have this deep sense of right and wrong. You feel it when you see someone being bullied, or when you hear about a terrible injustice. You feel it when you apologize, or even when you feel guilty for something you did wrong. It's like there's this inner voice telling us what's right and what's wrong. But where does that voice come from? Why do we care so much about justice, fairness, and doing good when, honestly, it would be so much easier to just live for ourselves? I want you to imagine a world without any moral rules. Picture it. What would that look like? If there were no rules, no sense of right or wrong, could we even function as a society? Could there be any order? Would we even trust each other? Probably not. So where do these rules come from? Why do we all seem to have a built-in sense that some things are good and some things are bad? Now, here's the mind-blowing part. If morality is real, if it's something that exists outside of our personal opinions, then it has to come from somewhere. And that somewhere, I'm going to argue, is beyond just human culture or evolution. It points to something or someone much larger. Could it be God?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
The origin of morality. Let's break this down. Some people say that morality just comes from society, that we learn it from our parents, teachers, or just the culture around us. But there's a problem with that view. Think about it. If morality was just something made up by society, then it would be completely subjective. Different cultures could have completely different ideas about what's right or wrong. And yet, no matter where you go in the world, certain moral values seem to be universal. Almost every culture agrees that things like murder, theft, and injustice are wrong. Why? Why do we all agree on these things, even if we've never met people from the other side of the world? And here's another question for you. Why do we feel guilty when we do something wrong, even if no one else sees it? It's not just about getting caught. It's deeper than that. It's like we know that we've violated some moral law that exists outside of ourselves. That's not just society talking. That's something inside us, something deeper. Could it be that morality isn't just a human invention, but something that's built into the fabric of reality? And if so, who put it there? Could evolution explain morality? Now you might be thinking, well, maybe morality evolved. Maybe it's just a survival mechanism that helps us get along better as a species, and yeah, that's a popular explanation. But here's where it gets tricky. Evolution is all about survival, right? It's about doing whatever it takes to pass on your genes. But morality often tells us to sacrifice, to put others ahead of ourselves, even when it doesn't benefit us. Think about heroes who risk their lives to save others, or people who stand up against injustice, even when it costs them everything. Why would evolution produce behaviors that go against self-preservation? And here's another question. If morality is just a product of evolution, then it's not really about what's right or wrong. It's just about what helps us survive. But that doesn't seem to be how we actually experience morality. We don't just think it's useful to be good. We think it's right even if it doesn't benefit us. So where does that sense of rightness come from? The moral lawgiver. At this point, we're left with a mystery. Morality seems to be something more than just a social construct or an evolutionary tool. It feels objective, like a law that we all recognize, even if we don't always follow it. And if there's a moral law, then there must be a moral lawgiver, right? Just like a law in any society comes from someone who made the law, an objective moral law would need to come from someone who created it. This is where the idea of God comes in. If morality is real, if it's not just something humans made up, then it points to the existence of a being who created that moral law. And that being, many would argue, is God. But maybe you're still not convinced. Maybe you're thinking, okay, but couldn't morality just be a weird coincidence? Something that just happened to evolve in humans? Well, stick with me, because in the next part of this video, we're going to dive even deeper into this mystery. We'll explore what happens when we try to live without objective morality, and why the idea of a moral lawgiver makes so much sense. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. All right, thanks for sticking with me so far. Now let's take this conversation to the next level. Imagine a world where morality doesn't exist. What would happen if we all just decided that there's no such thing as right and wrong? What if we said that everyone gets to decide their own moral code and there's no higher standard to appeal to? Would that be freedom, or would it be chaos? Chaos without morality. Think about it. If there's no objective morality, then who's to say what's right or wrong? If one person thinks murder is okay and another thinks it's wrong, who's right? Without some kind of higher moral standard, it's just one opinion against another. And that's a scary thought, isn't it? Because if morality is just a matter of opinion, then there's nothing stopping the strong from oppressing the weak. There's nothing stopping someone from just doing whatever they want, regardless of how it affects others. Now, I want you to ask yourself, do you really believe that morality is just an opinion? Deep down, do you think that things like murder, theft, and injustice are actually wrong, no matter what anyone else says? If so, then you're already agreeing with the idea that morality is objective. And if morality is objective, then it has to come from somewhere beyond just human opinion. The problem with subjective morality. Let's dig into this a little more. Some people argue that morality is subjective, that it's just something we make up based on our personal preferences or cultural norms. But here's the problem with that. If morality is subjective, then there's no such thing as real justice. Think about that. If morality is just a matter of opinion, then how can we say that anything is truly wrong or unjust? How can we condemn things like genocide, slavery, or human trafficking if it's all just a matter of personal or cultural preference? And here's another deep question to consider. If morality is subjective, then why do we feel such a strong sense of outrage when we see injustice? Why do we feel that some things are absolutely wrong, no matter what? That feeling of moral outrage, that sense of justice, is a clue that morality is real, that it's not just something we made up. The role of conscience. Let's talk about conscience for a second. You know that feeling you get when you do something wrong, even if no one else knows about it. That's your conscience. It's like this inner voice that tells you when you've crossed a moral line. But here's the question, where does that voice come from? Why do we feel guilt or shame when we do something wrong, even if no one else sees it? Some people might say that conscience is just a product of our upbringing, that it's something we learned from our parents or society. But that doesn't fully explain it, does it? Because even people who grow up in corrupt societies still have a sense of right and wrong. They still feel guilt when they do something they know is wrong. And that guilt doesn't come from society, it comes from within. Could it be that our conscience is actually a clue to something greater? Could it be that it's pointing us to a moral law that comes from beyond ourselves? And if so, where does that moral law come from? Morality points to God. At this point, it's becoming clearer morality seems to be something real, something objective, something that exists outside of us. And if that's true, then it points to the existence of a moral lawgiver, someone who created that moral law. And that someone, many would argue, is God. But don't take my word for it. Think about it for yourself. When you feel that deep sense of right and wrong, when you feel guilt or shame, when you feel outraged by injustice, where do those feelings come from? Are they just random, or do they point to something greater? Do they point to a God who created us with a moral sense, a God who cares about justice and goodness? In the next part of this video, we're going to explore what happens when societies reject the idea of a moral lawgiver and why that leads to some of the biggest problems in our world today. Stay tuned, because this is where things really get interesting. Thanks for sticking with me so far. Now let's talk about what happens when we reject morality altogether. A world without God. Imagine a world where people no longer believe in objective morality, where they no longer believe in a moral lawgiver like God. What happens in that kind of world? Well, we don't have to imagine. We've already seen it in history. Take some of the most brutal regimes in history like Nazi Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union. These regimes rejected the idea of a higher moral law. They didn't believe in a God who created humans with inherent value or dignity. And what happened? They ended up committing some of the worst atrocities in human history. Why? Because without a belief in objective morality, there's nothing stopping people from doing whatever they want. There's no higher standard to appeal to. There's no one to hold people accountable. The danger of moral relativism. This is the danger of moral relativism, the idea that there's no objective right or wrong, that everyone gets to decide their own moral code. When we embrace relativism, we lose our ability to condemn evil. We lose our ability to fight for justice. Because if morality is just a matter of opinion, then who's to say what's right or wrong? But here's the thing, deep down, we all know that some things are wrong. We all know that things like murder, slavery, and oppression are wrong no matter what. That's not just an opinion, that's a fact. And if it's a fact, then it points to the existence of a moral law. And if there's a moral law, then there has to be a moral lawgiver. God and human dignity. Let's take this even further. If morality is real, if it's something that exists outside of us, then it tells us something important about human beings. It tells us that we have value, that we have dignity, that we're not just random accidents of evolution. It tells us that we were created by a God who cares about justice, goodness, and love. And that's why morality is such a powerful clue for the existence of God. So what do you think? Does morality point to something greater? Does it point to a God who created us with a moral sense, a God who cares about justice and goodness? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're ready to dive even deeper into this topic, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Alright, so we've covered a lot so far. We've talked about how morality seems to be objective, how it points to a moral lawgiver, and how rejecting morality leads to chaos. But in this final part, we're going to go even deeper. We're going to explore why morality is evidence for God, not just as a distant lawgiver, but as a personal, loving being who is intimately connected to what we experience as good and evil. By the end of this section, you'll see that morality doesn't just suggest that God exists, it tells us something crucial about who God is. The nature of goodness. Let's start with a fundamental question: what is good? This might sound simple, but it's actually a pretty deep question. When we say something is good, what do we mean? Is it just about what's useful or beneficial? Or is there something more to it? Think about the best people you know, the kind of people you describe as good. What is it about them that makes you say that? It's probably not just that they're helpful or kind. It's something deeper, something about their character, right? Goodness feels like a quality that goes beyond actions. It's about who someone is on the inside. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Many philosophers and theologians have argued that goodness itself is a reflection of God's character. When we say that something is good, what we're really doing is recognizing a quality that is rooted in the nature of God. God is not just a being who follows a moral code, he is the source of goodness. In fact, some would say that God is goodness itself. Without God, moral values lose their grounding. They become arbitrary, just floating rules with no real authority behind them. And if that's the case, then why should we care about them at all? Why should we feel guilty when we break them? Why should we strive to live morally if there's no higher being who designed us to live that way? But if morality is grounded in God's nature, if it flows from who He is, then it's not arbitrary at all. It's deeply meaningful. It's part of the very fabric of the universe. In fact, it's part of who we are, because we were created in God's image. Created in God's image. This idea that we are created in the image of God is one of the most powerful concepts in all of theology. It explains why we have this deep sense of right and wrong, why we care about justice, and why we feel guilt when we do something wrong. We have a moral sense because we are reflecting God's moral nature. Think about this: if God is the source of all goodness, then we, being made in His image, are designed to reflect that goodness, to live in harmony with it. This is why we feel such a strong pull toward doing what's right, even when it's hard. It's why we feel inner conflict when we do something wrong. It's like there's a part of us that knows we were made for something better, something higher. And here's the amazing part: when we live morally, when we act with kindness, justice, and love, we are actually participating in God's nature. We are reflecting His goodness in the world. That's why living a moral life feels so deeply fulfilling. It's what we were made for. But now, let me ask you a really deep question. Why do we often fail to live up to our moral standards? If we were made in God's image, why do we struggle so much with doing what's right? Why do we feel guilt and shame? Why do we hurt others, even when we know it's wrong? This is one of the central questions of human existence, and the answer goes back to the idea of free will. According to many religious traditions, God gave us the freedom to choose between good and evil. We were created with the capacity to reflect God's goodness, but we were also given the freedom to reject it. And that's where things like sin and moral failure come into the picture. But here's the thing: even when we fail, even when we make mistakes, that sense of right and wrong doesn't go away. It's still there. That inner voice, our conscience, keeps calling us back to what we know is right. And that's another powerful piece of evidence for God. If morality was just a human invention, then why would we feel this deep sense of guilt when we betray it? Why would we long for redemption? The role of redemption. This brings us to another important idea: redemption. The fact that we long for forgiveness, that we seek to make things right when we've done wrong, suggests that morality is more than just a set of rules. It's part of a larger story, one that involves not just justice, but also grace and healing. And here's where many religious traditions, especially Christianity, offer profound insights. In Christianity, the idea of redemption is central. The belief is that God, in His goodness, not only gives us a moral law, but also offers us forgiveness and healing when we fall short. The moral law shows us how we're supposed to live, but grace shows us that even when we fail, we are still loved. Think about that for a moment. If morality points to God's nature, then redemption points to God's love. It's not just about rules and laws, it's about a relationship with a God who cares deeply about us, who wants us to reflect His goodness, but also knows that we will stumble along the way. The ultimate purpose of morality. So, what's the ultimate purpose of morality? It's not just about keeping us in line or making sure society runs smoothly, though those things are important. It's about something much bigger. Morality is about drawing us into a deeper relationship with God. It's about helping us become the kind of people we were meant to be, people who reflect God's goodness, justice, and love in the world. And that's why morality is such powerful evidence for God. It's not just a set of rules, it's a reflection of God's nature. It's written into the fabric of reality, and it's written into our hearts. Every time we act with kindness, every time we seek justice, every time we feel guilt or shame for doing something wrong, we are engaging with something divine. So where does this leave us? Well, that depends on how you answer some big questions. Do you believe that morality is real? Do you believe that it points to something beyond ourselves? Do you believe that it reflects the nature of a God who is good, just, and loving? These are deep questions, and they're not easy to answer. But one thing is clear: if morality is real, if it's more than just a human invention, then it points to something greater than ourselves. It points to a God who created us with a purpose, who cares about how we live, and who invites us to reflect His goodness in the world. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, I hope this video has given you something to think about. Morality is one of the most profound aspects of human existence, and when we really dig into it, we find that it's a powerful clue to the existence of God. So, what do you think? Does morality point to God? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious.